In the 1530s, Europe was tearing itself apart. Martin Luther had just fractured Christianity, and the resulting clash between the Catholic Church and his new Protestant followers plunged the continent into massive, bloody warfare. But caught in the crossfire was a third, radical faction, the Anabaptists. Both Catholics and Lutherans despised them, hunting them down and burning them at the stake. Hunted and desperate, this outcast sect became convinced that the apocalypse was weeks away and that God was about to destroy the wicked world. They found their sanctuary in the city of Münster. As you can see in this 16th century engraving, it was a wealthy, independent stronghold in Westphalia, protected by massive double walls, a wide moat, and bristling with towering churches and defensive bastions. A radical local preacher named Bernard Rothman realized he could use a relatively new technology to broadcast an invitation. He fired up the printing presses, pumping out thousands of pamphlets and smuggling them across Europe to anyone who would listen. The message inside went viral among the poor and persecuted. Rothman declared that Münster had become the new Jerusalem. It was a communist utopia where all money and property were shared equally, and it would be the only place on earth spared from God's impending wrath. Thousands of desperate farmers, artisans, and runaway nuns flocked to the city gates. But right behind them came the local Catholic prince-bishop, furious that heretics had hijacked his city. He marched thousands of mercenaries to Münster and threw a total blockade around the walls. The trap slammed shut. The printed promise of a socialist heaven had lured thousands of vulnerable believers straight into a besieged, inescapable fortress. Inside those walls, a charismatic Dutch baker named Jan Matthias stepped into the power vacuum. He declared himself a prophet sent directly by God, and the terrified, trapped citizens quickly surrendered total control to him. Matthias immediately forced his utopian vision into reality. He banned all commercial transactions and ordered every citizen to surrender their coins, food, and private property to the city's deacons so it could be distributed equally. Then came the ultimatum. Anyone who refused to be rebaptized into the sect was marched out of the city gates into the freezing winter wasteland, right into the waiting swords of the bishop's mercenaries. With the unbelievers purged, Matthias's grip on the city tightened. Surrounded by adoring followers, he developed a fatal delusion. He believed he was entirely invincible, personally ordained by God to ride out and annihilate the besieging army. On Easter Sunday, 1534, he put that delusion to the test. Matthias strapped on his armor, mounted a horse, and rode out of the city gates with a handful of men. He charged straight into a wall of 500 heavily armed knights. The battle lasted mere minutes. The bishop's soldiers hacked the prophet to pieces. They impaled his severed head on a pike outside the city and nailed his mangled body parts to the wooden gates for all of Münster to see. Watching from the ramparts, the Anabaptists were paralyzed. The sudden, violent death of their invincible savior shattered the illusion of divine protection, leaving a terrified, starving population trapped in a complete power vacuum. That vacuum was quickly filled by Jan of Leiden, a 25-year-old tailor's apprentice from Holland. He possessed a terrifying talent for manipulation, and within weeks he dismantled the commune's elder council and centralized all authority onto himself. Jan crowned himself the king of the world and established a brutal theocracy. He drafted new laws making any disobedience to his absolute authority an offense punishable by instant death. He then decreed a strict mandate of forced polygamy. Arguing that it was a command from the Old Testament, Jan passed a law compelling every woman and girl over puberty to marry, while allowing men to take as many wives as they wanted. The new king fully exploited this rule.
While his subjects scavenged for rats and boiled shoe leather to survive the blockade, Jan hosted lavish banquets in his confiscated mansion and amassed a personal harem of 16 wives. The terror of his reign was absolute. When one of his wives, Elizabeth, expressed pity for the starving citizens and begged permission to leave the city, King Jan dragged her into the public square and personally beheaded her in front of the others. Word of this nightmare quickly bled over the ramparts. Fleeing refugees and smuggled letters carried graphic stories of the executions, the starvation, and the bizarre polygamous cult into the encampments outside. The horror of Münster achieved what diplomacy could not. The warring Catholic and Lutheran nobles suspended their own bloody religious conflict. Fearing this radicalism would infect their own territories, they merged their armies, combined their bank accounts, and agreed to crush the city together.
The Anabaptists had pushed their society to such a violent extreme that they managed to unite mortal enemies, bringing the combined military might of the Holy Roman Empire down on their heads. In June 1535, the end arrived. The massive, unified army finally breached the defenses and poured into the darkened streets, slaughtering the starved, exhausted defenders and taking back the city. King Jan and his top deputies were captured alive, but they were shown no mercy. To make a permanent example of the heretics, the ruthless authorities tied them to heavy posts in the public square and tore them apart with red-hot iron tongs. After they were killed, their heavily mutilated bodies were stuffed into the 3 iron cages that you see right here and hoisted high above the city, chained to the Gothic stone steeple of St. Lambert's Church to rot in the open air. The bishop wanted the world to remember what happens when radical zealots take over a city, and that warning stands today. The church left those 3 iron cages bolted to the steeple, where they still hang nearly 5 centuries later. The Münster Rebellion leaves us with a dark historical truth. When charismatic leaders prey on the desperate with the promise of a perfect, equal utopia, that promise is rarely the blueprint for paradise. Usually, it's the foundation for a blood